Hi, thanks for attending this webinar on 10 tips for securing and making the most of your small business technology. I'm Matt Rose, the Director of Technology Services for TechRage IT. So during the presentation, we'll talk about a few subjects here. We'll talk about cybersecurity statistics, why small businesses are at risk, how cybercriminals will profit from you and your data, 7 different types of cyber attacks, and then finally 10 tips that you can use for your small business technology. All right, here's some statistics to start with. So obviously, as you can see, 54% of people don't think their business is too small for a cyber attack. That's just not the case. In fact, you're more likely to be attacked if you're a small business because it's just easier. And we're going to talk about that in the future slide. 91% of businesses don't have cyber liability insurance, and I would think many of them don't know what it is. I would highly encourage everyone to reach out to their business insurance advisor, talk about it, see what they need to do to qualify for it, and get it. It's very important in today's day and age, and you could really use it if something happens and you are hacked. The next 2 slides or 2 facts basically say that people don't totally understand how to protect themselves or have anyone to address the problems for them, which is not terribly surprising in a small business because a lot of times you're not an IT or a technology company, and so you don't have anyone on staff who should know this, or if they do, they know basics. So that's not a surprising fact. The last one, though, human error and system failure accounting for 52%, that's something that's normal, and we see that every day. You can put all the security protocols into practice, and somebody can still click on an incorrect link. They can still respond to an email they shouldn't have, or give any kind of info they shouldn't have. So training is always extremely important. So this is just a quick slide on who we are. We're a technology firm that provides managed IT services, Voiceover IP, and consulting. And we've been around since 2015 and are a woman-owned company and have more than 20 years of industry experience. So as I said earlier, I'm Matt Rose. I've been in the industry for over 20 years, and I've been at various levels in the industry. I've worked for very small companies all the way up to global 200 companies, and I've served as a virtual IT director across local and remote locations and worked in practically every IT infrastructure job in that time. So why are small businesses big targets? So they're easier to get to, and sometimes the payout is actually even better. The reason for that is they have limited to no security in place, and they can still get to the confidential information. If you think about it, a small business, if you hack into one computer, you're likely into a computer that has access to bank records, financial records, credit card numbers with a lot better percentage than a large, hundreds or thousands of person company. The other thing is they don't have the security controls in place. They have, consumer grade firewalls or no security at all. So it's just easy to get in, or their passwords are very, very simple or, without any complexity. They also don't know they've been hacked for up to 6 months on average. So they're able to gather data, look through all the data, possibly be recording different things, and there's no way to know for up to 6 months. We talked about there's just different safeguards, but even when it comes to small business accounts, bank accounts, or just QuickBooks and things like that, they're not going to have as much two-factor. They're not going to have complex passwords. So again, once they get in, it's just easier to get through everything else. And there is no backup in place. Most of the time, if they were to ransomware your files, you have no way to get them back. They're just theirs, and you'll have to pay the ransom and hope you get those files back. So how do the cyber criminals profit from your data? Well, just talk to the ransomware payments. That's the easy one. They will literally encrypt them, which basically means they're locking them and taking the key away until you pay them. And when you pay them, they'll maybe give you the key. Not everyone even gets their data back. They know you're in a position where you have to get your data back. You don't have backups. But unfortunately, even if you pay them, you still may not get those files back, ever. They will take your data and convert it to money. What that means is if they get credit card numbers or bank account numbers, they'll just make purchases, kind of like if you get your credit card stolen at a gas station. And I hope you don't notice, or it's too late, they've already gotten some goods by the time you do. They can also take your intellectual property, your trade secrets, things like that, and sell those. Sell those to a competitor, sell those to a foreign national government that may need them. or hold those for ransom, which are maybe worth a lot more than some random Word file. And then finally, if those two fail, they can still do a couple things. They can get a list of email addresses and still go after more targets. And anyone who's in sales knows that the more quantity, you're always going to have the better chance of a sale. So even if you weren't the payday they were hoping for, you probably communicate with a ton of different people, and they now have all those email addresses to try to phish them, possibly even phish them as you. And then they will sell your business credentials on the dark web. We'll talk about this a little later, but the dark web is a real thing, and they do trade and sell credentials they get when they phish you there for someone else who may find a different use for your data. So 7 types of cyber attacks that are targeting small businesses and startups. With malware, it's kind of the oldest one in the book here. The first one people are probably used to is just an old school virus. That's what came about in probably the 90s, and a virus was just there to delete your files and delete your data. And it was usually spread through online file sharing. Back in the day, probably from putting a disk in someone else's computer, and that's kind of where it started. Then there were things called worms, which are a type of virus that would literally worm themselves through a network to someone else's computer, also trying to delete data. Spyware is one that people probably have heard of, and that's just like the name says, they will spy on you, taking you screenshots, keystrokes, getting your credit card numbers, anything of the like that they can use to be at their advantage. A lot of times spywares came with Trojans, or kind of like a Trojan horse. They would come in looking like real software or a real file, and when you ran it, sometimes it actually ran the program, but it would create a backdoor to allow for other malware, again, usually spyware, to try to figure out what your data was, get your keystrokes, get your password. So they're very dangerous, although they looked extremely innocent. Adware, I don't think we see this much anymore, but when we did, they were just really annoying and made the computers practically unusable without clicking on a bunch of ads you didn't want to click on. But they actually made money for the attackers. And the last two, botnets, this is really noticeable if you find your computer is just slow out of nowhere, but you don't have pop-ups and you can't figure anything else out. A botnet is basically an army that your computer gets recruited to, and it's now working with this army to attack someone else's computer. So therefore, your computer will be slow because it's like it's doing work it doesn't know about. And then finally, rootkits. These are kind of the hardest to detect and kind of the worst we have. A lot of times, you just have to reformat a computer. The way to describe a rootkit is, it's like if someone got into your house when you left the door open to take the dogs out, and then they hid in your closet. And then when you went to work or went to bed, they had a party, they did whatever they wanted at that point. So they just kind of hide in plain sight until it's time for them to do what they need to do. And you usually notice a lot of these by your computer slowness. So if you just find your computer slow and you can't figure out why, a lot of times it's a key to show you have some sort of malware. All right, now it's malvertising. All right, so malvertising can look like a generic pop-up, but if you click on it and both the website and your computer or browser are infected or not patched, you can actually get a piece of malware from that. It's not common, but it can happen. You should be very careful to keep everything patched and not go to bad websites for this reason. Man in the middle kind of looks like the icon there shows. It's most common if you were to go to like a hotel or something and you're outside trying to connect to their wireless. Someone could be sitting there with a laptop at a table and showing an ad hoc or a fake wireless network with the same name. And when you connect to that, you get to go to Facebook or whatever you're trying to do, but they're seeing all your keystrokes in plain text and able to do whatever they want with that data. It's got a couple pretty easy things to notice though. You always want to look for secure versus non-secure websites. So if you look at this slide here to the top right, notice how all of those web addresses have a lock somewhere in the address. That's basically showing it as a secure site. It's secure from you to the other computer, and a third party is saying that as a secure certificate. The ones on the left are all what happens when it's not secure. Now, sometimes a website just has an issue with their certificate and their security, but a lot of times it's showing the website's been hacked or you're not actually connecting to that website securely. So pay great attention to these. You should virtually never see what's on the left. One thing you can do, or a couple things, is you can go with a VPN to connect to sites, and that is a great protection even for man in the middle because you're in your own little secure tunnel to get to where you need to go. If you're small enough where you can't have a VPN in your office, there are websites and applications where you can use their secure site and pay them monthly to kind of VPN through them. And if you have a hotspot on your phone, typically that's a lot more secure because you can control the password, you can control who's connected to it. It's just a matter of if you have enough data on your plan. All right, drive-by downloads are very similar to malvertising. The difference is they can actually download malware without you doing anything. That's how affected the website and your computer likely have to be for this to happen. So again, very uncommon, but just keep everything patched and keep security going on your computer and don't visit bad websites. Password attacks, this is really the most of what you'll see. This sometimes can be a brute force where someone's just trying to guess your username and password, but usually it's because of a phishing attack where they know your username or your email, and they know at least the password you previously had because of the dark web or because they literally just got a phishing attack going. This example is what you can pull from the dark web, and this was an example we ran a few years ago where the email would have actually been an actual email address, and the password hit in many ways was the real password. Those numbers that can actually are called, it's a hash. It can be turned into a password as well. So when you look at those, that means that on the dark web, these people's emails and passwords were found. So the truth is most people, when they change their passwords, or if they're required to, just put a 1 on the end or a 2 on the end. That's not hard. So if you go back to them trying to do a password attack, all they're doing is adding the most common numbers or whatnot to the password, and they likely will get in. So this can be very dangerous. Next, phishing and spoofing. So very similar things, they kind of mold into one thing now, but usually a spoofing attempt is to phish you for data. And a lot of times they're phishing as the CEO of the company or something of that nature, looking to you to get different gift cards, something of that nature. But we have an example actually from a few years ago that we've been using for a while now, but this was an email we actually received that was trying to look like they were Polk County, Florida, looking for some bids. We'd never done work with Polk County, so it just seemed odd right out of the gate. So we looked it up, and the email they were trying to come from was fl-polk-county.net, which is not the actual email address that Polk County uses. And then if you look through the email, you'll notice it's not directed to anyone in particular. It actually says sales when it was sent to our info address. And then the bad English, odd spellings, but it actually has what appears to be a real email signature. So in this case, we actually contacted them. They were already aware, but it's very hard to stop these because they didn't own the fl-polk-county.net website or domain. So these are very difficult to find. And if somebody had replied to these, they would have started a conversation and probably asked for different information about the company or even like down payments or who knows what. So these can be extremely dangerous. Pay attention to. All right, so now 10 tips for securing and making the most of your small business technology. The first is Voiceover IP. There's a lot of different products out there. They have it for home, they have it for business, but it's a much better idea than doing a cell phone or an old school phone line through like AT&T. First off, it's a lot cheaper than those two options, but also it allows for growth. If you start your business and everybody is calling your cell phone, as you grow your team, either everyone has to have a different cell phone number or now you're fighting to get everybody to stop calling you. So if you start with a voice over IP line, it's very inexpensive. You can still have it forward to your cell phone. You don't need to have a physical phone anywhere. But as you grow, people are calling the same phone number, and you can add people to your team with extensions and ways that allow you to look like the larger business you've become. And again, there's a ton of others, and you can make calls from anywhere, and it's all from the same number. So that's one huge tip I would give everybody. Data backups. So first and foremost, we tell people to follow a 3-2-1 rule with backups, and that means you have 3 copies of your data on 2 different media, and 1 copy is offsite. That could be as simple as it's on your computer, it's on OneDrive, and then you actually copy to a USB drive once a week. That's a simple one. It also has a lot of failure possibilities by you forget, you lose the USB drive, it gets corrupt. So there's a lot of things, but that is a simple 3-2-1. You can go to the point of spending a ton of money on this, depending on how important your data is. So just keep that in mind. That's just something to really consider in keeping your data with the 3-2-1 rule. Since I just mentioned if you use OneDrive, keep in mind that OneDrive, Dropbox, things like that are really not a backup. They're a cloud sync. They allow your files to sync to the cloud so they're accessible on the web or from a different computer you may have. They protect well against the fact of if your computer got run over because it fell off your car or you lost it at the airport. They don't protect if you get ransomware. If you get ransomware and that computer is connected to the internet, it will sync your ransomware. And the odds of getting your files back are pretty slim from a cloud service like that because they do not back up your data. There's other products that will do that, but by default, that will not happen. Same thing with emails. Microsoft and Google and really every email out there does not back up data by default. It is part of the terms of service that we've all signed and probably didn't read. So there's other products for that, but just keep in mind that you are not getting backup by default. And finally, kind of relating to all this is to have a disaster recovery plan. And for a small business, that can be as simple as just knowing where your files are and knowing you can get up and running quickly if something happened. But think about what happens in a disaster, or if you got ransomware, what's your recovery plan? How long will it take you? How much are you going to spend on it? What it means. There's a lot of different pieces to it, but it's something you should start thinking about now rather than later. File sharing and collaboration, since we were kind of on the same subject. OneDrive, Dropbox, or OneDrive and Google versus Dropbox is that OneDrive and Google include basically the same thing as Dropbox with what you pay them for their services. So you may not need to buy that expensive Dropbox for business account. It may be what you're used to, but to save yourself some money, that's really important. If you're already doing most Office 365 accounts through Google, use the built-in. You can do the same syncs. You can still share files, things like that. As with sharing it, you can share any of these internally or externally. With both those, you should be careful about how you share it and the permissions. You want to make sure you're sharing from a standpoint of that you're sharing directly to one person or to the only people you want, and not just sharing a generic link that anyone that gets it can get to your files. Make sure if you want view rights, edit rights, things of that nature. And then finally, you can actually put a time limit on these where you can say that they only have 7 days or 30 days to access it. And that way, even if you forget about it and somehow the relationship with whoever you're working with goes sour, their link expired. And then you should create a process for how you're going to do all your files. A folder level process, how you're going to name them so you can search for them later and not lose them based on just naming it something bad. But also think about who's going to have access to save and delete files. Most specifically, I would say deleting, because I've seen it where if everyone in the organization has access to delete, especially if you don't have a backup product going, someone may have deleted something inadvertently or on purpose, and you don't know until it's been gone from the recycle bin, and you now have lost that file for good. So just make sure to think about how you're going to do your file sharing and collaboration ahead of time. Email security. So the junk email folder in Google or in Office 365 is really just a spam filter. It is not advanced security. It's not necessarily meant to find phishing emails or phishing attacks. It may catch some from time to time, but it's not meant to really catch the really dangerous emails out there. There are products that Microsoft requires as an extra charge, or you can do an add-on to either service. That's their whole point, is to be an extra layer of security and really look for those alerts that just came out from a new phishing attack. But just understand, don't just think your junk email box is meant for phishing as well. Also consider free versus branded emails. What I mean by that is free being a gmail.com address and a branded being your company name, your website. I feel like almost everybody gets a website with their domain name, but for some reason, a lot of people don't get a domain name based email. It's not expensive. It's about as little as $5 per email address per month, and you get a lot better control over security and what you can do with it and all sorts of different things. And your public perception is better. It's typically a better branding when you can pick whatever you want at your domain instead of a weird long Gmail address. So there's a lot of advantages to it. So definitely look to do that. And then with whatever you do, just be very careful with attachments and links. Depending on your antivirus or your security, you should be very careful before you open any attachments or links. Attachments are a little tougher, but links you can highlight over them and they will show you where they're going. And if it says Microsoft.com, but it's going to some other random website, you probably don't want to click on it, or go on your own directly there if it's saying something about your password. Okay, with the internet in general, there's a number of types of internet service you can get. For the small and medium business world, I decided to choose kind of the three most common you'll see, especially for a home-based business. You'll see fiber internet in some of the newer construction and newer reconstruction. This is typically going to be your best bang for your buck you're going to get if you're a home or a small business, but it is not always available. Next, there's broadband, which is kind of spectrum, and that's usually solid, and it's going to be enough for what you need, and they have multiple choices on a price level. And then finally is DSL. DSL is always going to be, it's better than having dial-up, obviously, or satellite internet, but it's not good. It's not reliable, especially when it comes to voice over IP or video calls. And so if you are currently on DSL, you may want to look into broadband. It's not really that much more expensive anymore. And I will guarantee you, in the world we live in with voice over IP and voice, you'll find much better results. Next, always be leery of unprotected wireless. I mean, specifically ones that just let you log in without a password, but even Paneras and things of that nature, still be very careful if you're not controlling the wireless, because there could still be the people with the man in the middle attacks. You always want to consider VPNs in those situations like we talked about earlier, or even your own mobile hotspot again, if you can control it, because it's a controlled environment you have. So with meetings and video conference calls, obviously we're all doing a lot of them right now, and that's probably going to continue for some time. Keep in mind there are a lot of free options. Again, Microsoft and Google, with most of their accounts, include their own versions of video calls. And they actually are great, except if you need an external dial-up number. If you need someone to be able to dial in and won't use audio from their phone or their computer, then you may need to pay extra. But otherwise, you can have an internal and external meeting. Zoom also offers a free version of theirs, but there is a time limit and a participant limit. Otherwise, all the other ones, typically cost around $15 or so a month. Make sure with any of them, though, that you're securing them. What that means is first having a password that they have to log into. You may not even notice this if you email somebody the link directly from the app because it's embedded in the link, but it more protects from somebody guessing your meeting number and not being able to just join randomly. They need to know a fairly complex password to get in. So using the meeting passwords, and then also making sure you have a waiting room enabled so that you have to allow people in the room as the meeting starts. This is typically on by default, especially since Zoom had their issues with the Zoom bombing, but this also prevents people just joining the meeting and doing things you probably don't want to see, or just people you don't know that are looking like there's someone, that they've been hacked into someone else's machine. And then you'll see a link here for internet bandwidth. You can click on it. It gives you some suggested speeds for doing different meetings and video conferences. Next, password managers, which you guys may not have even heard of. It's something fairly new in the last few years that people have started to use. This is not Chrome asking if it wants you to save your password. Many people do that, and it's convenient, but it is not at all secure. You can get in and see those plain text passwords pretty easily, so I would not recommend using that. What these are products similar to like a LastPass. We use a Passportal product for ourselves and all of our clients. Their whole point is password security and also convenience. You have one main difficult to guess password along with multi-factor authentication to get in. And then when you're there, you got a password generator for new websites you have to log into. So instead of putting in that same password you've always used, you can generate a longer, complex password and then save it so you never have to remember it again. So if it gets on the dark web, fine, someone got into that one website, but not everything. And there are free options of this as well. So this is something you should definitely take advantage of. And trust me, from experience, it'll be a game changer when you start using it. All right, two-factor authentication. So realistically, this is when you get a text message or a push authentication on an app, or a code that changes every 60 seconds on your application, or even a physical key. But it's getting to the point now that you should be looking for websites, applications that really only have two-factor, or even better, require it. If they don't have it, either better not be any type of data that's important to you, or you should ask them when they're looking into that. So two-factor should be a must for virtually everything you do nowadays. Endpoint security. So this used to be called just antivirus. There's a lot more to it. But even with antivirus, you can get a free one, which is better than nothing, but you should check to see what free versus paid will get you. Typically, the free ones will update on a regular basis. The paid ones, though, may get additional spam filters or phishing filters, web filtering, software firewalls, even some types of encryption. Sometimes just to get the ads off, though. So be careful what you're looking at when you get a paid version. There are also other products you may want to bundle with antivirus, things like Malwarebytes, DNS security, or UTM. Or these are typically built into firewalls now, and it's kind of like a firewall on steroids. It allows that even things like if one computer on your network gets hacked, it'll actually put it in its own little island and isolate itself so that nothing can happen to it until the IT guys can get to it and fix it. So there's a lot to this. We kind of call it like an onion now that you have to peel back the layers. And finally, hardware and devices. So with both your internet hardware and your computers, there's consumer versus business. Obviously, you always want to look towards business. If you have a home-based business right now, it may not be worth something you're thinking about going and replacing what you bought at a big box store, but there are additional security, additional features. Sometimes that UTM we talked about earlier is on a business firewall. It can really save you a lot of time and security right off the bat. Then with laptops and desktops, the ones you can buy at a big box store are typically going to have less of a warranty, made with cheaper parts, have less specs, and even aren't upgradable a lot of the times. When you get a business grade, it's going to have more of a warranty and you actually can upgrade them. So be very cognizant of that you shouldn't need to be buying a new laptop every year. Even if the price looks really great, it's not necessarily always going to be that great. And one quick tip I would give that's not really on here is that you should really always look for an SSD or solid state hard drive instead of a regular hard drive, or as they call it, just HDD. The speed difference is great, and I guarantee you'll see the results of that immediately in your business. Next, think about needs versus wants. You don't always need to spend $2,500 on a laptop because of a flashy name or a flashy brand. Think about what you really need to do for your job and what your work requires. Sometimes you need that $2,500 laptop, but a lot of times you can deal with something half the price, if not even lower in price. So be very careful to make sure you're making the right decision for yourself and your business. And finally, think about mobile device security as you grow. Do your employees download their email, download files on their phone? Are they getting paid for that, or getting a stipend? And then more importantly, if they leave or get disgruntled, do you have any way of knowing you can get that data back or protect that data? So there's a whole nother product called mobile device management that you should think about if that's the case, and that allows you to kind of protect that data and what those people are doing with those phones while still allowing them to use a personal phone. So in conclusion, no matter how much planning you're going to do, things will occasionally happen. There's new exploits that are developed every single day. So whoever's doing IT for you guys should really be vigilant, and having ongoing training is greatly important, but also knowing what's coming around the horizon and what products can help your business continue to grow. Make sure you utilize all the tools you have. Something that may be available with a product you have, look into it, see if it's worth adding both your security and your efficiency in your business. And talk to your insurance about being cyber insurance compliant and getting cyber insurance. It can save you down the road. And finally, now is the time to act. All right, so thank you. And here are some ways on the screen you can contact us. Please make sure to stop by our booth for more resources to help with your business technology.